Peter Hahn spricht ja auch Deutsch. He is a former lawyer from Berlin who lives in Wellington. And we won't hold that against you, Peter. I know you did live in Auckland to start with, because that's where we met some 20 odd years ago, I think. He studied law in Berlin, worked on the Kudamm for a while there before immigrating to New Zealand. And he has been a member of the German Chamber of Commerce for many, many years, and is one of our go-tos when we have curly questions or customers who really need some help. So Peter, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks, Monique. And just to make it even worse, I think it's almost 30 years.
Oh no!
It's Hahn and Associates was established in 1994.
Okay. Yeah.
I was in Auckland before that, so we're getting old. But anyway, so I'll try to do the impossible and cover everything else. And I reduce it to pathways to New Zealand in terms of resident visa. Now, the resident visa is what everyone wants to have, who wants to live here permanently in New Zealand. That allows you to do pretty much anything that a New Zealander can do as well, like voting, for example, and all that kind of stuff. So there are basically 4 ways into New Zealand. One is through money, the next one is through business, and the third one is through a job, and the fourth one is through a partnership, relationship with a New Zealander or a New Zealand resident visa holder. I'm not going to talk much about that, other than, yes, it is possible to live here if you find a Kiwi partner, and no, I can't help you finding that person. So let's go back to the other 3 options. The money or the investor category was covered nicely by Matt and Mark, so I'm not going to talk much about that, other than admitting that I'm probably one of those people who will talk out a lot of people out of this option because of the high risk involved with it. And I think everyone here will agree that this is high risk capital that needs to be invested. That is the purpose of this whole thing, I guess, as well. So not everyone is able to afford 15 million or 5 million New Zealand dollars to put into a high risk investment. So this has to be done carefully and, as Mark said, preferably with some professional assistance. Now, the next one is the business category, or properly called the entrepreneur category. This is a category, again, where I probably will talk you out of it because there are alternatives, usually, hopefully. One of the reasons is that the entrepreneur category is basically past its use-by date. It's probably one of the oldest categories around. I think the early 2000s it was introduced. And initially it was quite popular, but now everyone seems to hate it pretty much. There's also a long preparation time involved with this category because it's rather complex. And of course, it could be disestablished any time, and you don't want to invest that time and then to find out that this policy doesn't exist anymore. It also has very high decline rates. We're talking 95% or something like that. The last time I listened to an INZ presenter, probably a while ago in 2017 or so. And it's not efficient because you get initially a work visa, which allows you to work here for 3 years and establish your business. And only after 2 years can you apply for the resident visa, which you ultimately want to have. There are some cases where this works quite well. Typically, businesses that can move easily between countries, that IT industry typically where people can immediately, by moving to New Zealand, generate millions of dollars of export dollars, which is highly appreciated, and then they get their visas. So that's a policy, that's probably the only one that I would recommend that policy for. Just briefly, in that context, because often people ask me that, incorporating a company here, Firmengründung, does not give you any rights whatsoever in terms of living here or working here. It also doesn't give you the possibility of giving you your own job. You can't establish a company here and then give you a job offer. That doesn't work either. I'm just mentioning that because people ask me those questions. Now, the main policy or the main pathway to New Zealand is clearly by way of finding employment in New Zealand. We have the old point system, which is going to be disestablished on the 15th of August. We have the new point system, which will come into effect sometime in November, if I remember correctly. Then we have the green list, which is a list of occupations that are in high demand in New Zealand, which includes the straight to residence visa and the work to residence visa. Typically in occupations like engineering, IT, electricians, health, all sorts of health occupations are covered by that list and gives you a pathway to residence. And then the fourth one is via a job, that is through so-called sector agreements. And that's fairly new. Two sector agreements are in place. One is for care personnel, for example, in elderly care facilities like Altersheim. And the other one is truck and bus drivers, which is sensational because in those 30 years that I've been doing this, I could have never, ever promised a truck driver to realistically get a resident visa. Now there is a pathway. He would have to work here for 2 years as a truck driver. And then there's an option to get a resident visa. So those are the policies that you can get a resident visa via a job. Now, the key question, of course, is how do I get a job in New Zealand? I was very optimistic and hopeful when immigration or when the government introduced the accreditation requirement for employers. I thought, well, you know, yes, it's an extra bureaucratic step. They call this kind of stuff red tape in New Zealand. But at least those companies communicate in some way that they are interested in recruiting overseas people. Why would they go through that process otherwise? And we are now, I don't know how many, but it's probably around 50,000 or so accredited employers who should all be out there eagerly looking for those talented people from overseas and to employ them. However, the advice that I get, the feedback that I get from my clients is kind of different. They still tell me that most employers put in their ads, work visa or resident visa is required as a prerequisite. Now, why is that? There are probably many reasons, which would take more than 10 minutes to explain, but I'll just give you two examples. I had two nurses. One of them was here in New Zealand at the time, both from Germany, both very similar background, and she found a job in an elderly care facility in Timaru within a couple of days or weeks. You know, it didn't take much, it was easy process, and she's now on the pathway to residence with her work visa, and hopefully will be there in a year or so once she has completed her 2 years. Now, the other nurse, also from Germany, but at the time living in Paraguay, had already been in New Zealand and knew New Zealand really well. And she had, you know, even favorite employers that she thought she would apply for. And she did so and applied throughout New Zealand and didn't get any positive feedback whatsoever. And asked me, you know, what's the story? Why are you telling me that it's easy to find a job? And I said, well, you know, maybe it was because you are not here. Okay, she came to New Zealand, went straight to Kaitaia, where she wanted to live and work, went to her favorite employer and introduced herself. And that's the employer where she already applied from Paraguay. And 10 minutes later, that employer rings me and says, oh man, this is fantastic. She is so beautiful, you know, so such a good fit. And what do I have to do to get her the work visa and all that kind of thing? And yeah, so I think that gives you a little bit of an idea why this might be. There are probably more reasons than that. That I won't elaborate on now, but there's another thing that comes up in that context that you might think or you might ask. Can I look for a job in New Zealand with a visitor visa? Mm. Now, a visitor visa is, the strict answer is no, because the visitor visa is for specific purposes, to do tourism things, sightseeing and stuff like that, visit your friends, have some business meetings with other businesses and such like. Job search is not covered by those by the visitor visa policy, especially not if your intention is to stay here for good once you find a job. But it's a bit of a funny situation. You still have, so you obviously have to have the intention to do all those tourist things when you enter New Zealand. The minute you leave the airport, you can change your mind, and that's okay. You see the beautiful sun, the smiling people, and say, I'm not going to go away from here. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to find a job. That's okay. I leave it to your creative thinking to see, how that fits into your situation, and leave you to that. And then we'll cover, before I leave, another. So that has covered basically now all the resident visa options: job, business, money, and partnership with a New Zealander. But there's one other specific visa that fittingly is called specific purpose work visa that I want to cover, because I think that may be something that might be of interest for our audience. Just to give you an example, I have a client of ours as a glass machinery manufacturer. So and he basically had a contract to build a factory here in New Zealand, a glass factory. And that part of the contract was that they had to provide the installers and the people to train the staff on the machinery and all that kind of thing. And of course, as you can imagine, a factory like that takes a while to build. So we're talking 1 to 2 years, can't remember exactly. It was probably around 30 or so people that I had to bring in for that company at different times of the process. Some people had to be there at the beginning, others at the beginning and the end, and others sort of in the middle, and you had to manage this whole thing. But there is the specific purpose work visa, which is designed for that, and it works quite well. It's usually just mainly a project management thing, and those visas get actually waved through quite easily, typically. But to close my presentation, I want to give you another example of that specific purpose work visa, which I was quite keen on. And that was the client who wanted to sell velodromes. Now, velodromes are Radrennbahnen made out of Holz, also Holzradrennbahn. And he had a contract, and I was really excited because I'm into sport and all that kind of thing. I thought, oh, what a cool thing to be involved in. And he had the contract with the Wanganui City Council to get a new velodrome established and built. But unfortunately, the whole thing fell through. The reason it fell through was that the Wellington City Council, Wanganui City Council, got hacked. And someone hacked into their computers, saw that PDF contract, put another account number into it, and the money, the down payment, and the Germans were asking, oh, where's the money? Did you pay us? The down payment, that, yeah, we paid last week. Nothing came. And they figured out that some hacker put a Turkish account number into that contract, and the city council has transferred the money to Turkey, and I haven't heard from them since. Yeah. So I hope that you guys have more luck in New Zealand and in your business dealings, and leave it back to Monique on that one.
Right, Janet is asking, I'm an engineer for machines, with own office for engineering, machinery planning, plastic technology, organic plastic technical coaching, and technical documentation. How do you think about creating a cooperation with New Zealand companies for this? Maybe that's another question for me, or for the German Chamber, as well as for you guys.
I think it's not so much an immigration question, if I interpret it correctly.
Yeah. Janet, I will come back to you directly afterwards, and we can see whether we can find you a business partner here in New Zealand, because that would be the way to go first, I think. Then we have Nicole Müller. What about work visa straight to residency options with a job offer between August 15th and November 2023? Who wants to have a stab at that one?
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, sorry, I think that question might have come up as a consequence of how I presented it. So a straight to resident visa is possible now, tomorrow, and in August, September, and November. So that's no problem. So it's just, yeah, it's much more complex, all those new regulations and the old regulations to be able to present in 10 minutes or 12.
Okay, so Antonia's asked a question in German, basically asking which branches or companies are well known for taking foreign skilled labour. Is there a special job portal or network as far as helping for the job search? I mean, obviously, we have one for Germans. We do have a job portal, which is where our members, these are New Zealand and German companies, can list their job openings. But there are many other options as well. What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, and what is probably different from Germany is that in New Zealand, recruitment companies are very common.
Yes.
The Germans use another word, English word for it. They call it headhunters.
Yeah.
Which, in the New Zealand context might mean something else. But so that's probably something that people don't realize when they apply for jobs. They just look at Seek and Trade Me and stuff like that. There's also on Career New Zealand, which is a website. If you look there, and they can email me, I give them the link. There is basically one page or more with all the recruitment agents, all the job portals in New Zealand, and they divvy it up into certain regional areas, but also into specialties and such like. So that's probably the best answer I can give on that one.
Mm-hmm. Having just put an ad in Seek and being inundated in applicants, I can certainly recommend keep your eye on Seek, because they seem to have captured the market to a certain extent for those looking for jobs. And actually, from a perspective as an employer, it was a very very helpful process to work through. Back end is very useful.
By the way, one thing I mentioned, and that has some relation to, I forgot to mention, that has a relevance to that last question, is that nurse who applied from Paraguay, the employer said to me she got 350 applicants from overseas. So that is why she didn't answer those applications. Yeah. So that's why she had to be here. So, so it's possibly, a tricky one to just find jobs through those networks, but there's more to it, and I can't cover that in this context.
Okay. And then I think there was one question that I got ahead of in advance. What advice can you give regarding how potential German immigrants can achieve purchasing a New Zealand business? So I think, does that sort of tend back to the portal where they can look at potentially investing in a New Zealand business? What would you suggest there?
Well, it's probably not that clear. I mean, typically people who ask those questions think about entrepreneur categories, right. Purchasing a business, and then that's possible through the entrepreneur category, in theory, to purchase a business and then apply for the entrepreneur visa. But as I said, there are lots of reasons to stay away from that category. Other than that, purchasing a business doesn't give you any rights in terms of work rights or residency rights as such, unless it comes into the threshold of direct investment that Mark and Matt were talking about, where you can go through the process of getting approved by New Zealand Trade and Enterprise as an acceptable investment, and that's sort of, entrepreneur category through the back door, so to speak.
How possible is it to get accredited by the Engineering Board New Zealand with an automation and electrical engineer study at the German Fachhochschule and not a university? Qualifications.
Yeah, well, out of the top of my hand, I can't answer that question with the detail that it deserves. But there is and that has been around for a while, there is the possibility of getting the Engineering New Zealand, which is that organization that Nicole is talking about. They ultimately will comment on your degrees and your qualification and work experience, and then say something along the line that is, in line with what New Zealanders would expect, and with that letter you can probably meet those requirements. But I would have to go into the policy right now and see what the exact wording is of that green list condition that she is referring to. But yes, it is not a straightforward thing.
Thank you very much to our sponsors. Thank you very much to our speakers tonight. Bye-bye.